Normally, when you speak and then you take a break, half the people go home. But y'all didn't go home. We're ready to touch something interesting. I'll just do a quick 5-minute summary. This is about how do you provide food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security for yourself and your family. Now, you can make it about anything else you want, but that's what it's really about. And so you have to learn how to take control of the economic, politics, and culture where you live. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to provide food, clothing, and shelter in the optimal way. And once you do that, you're going to have to learn how to get control of land, labor, and resources. That's what we need. I'm talking with the real estate, and I think Sydney's doing real estate and dealing with some of these markets. And we'll be surprised. Let me tell you what's surprising. Because we always say we don't have certain things. You need to see how many black banks we do have in this country, and how many black credit unions we do have in this country, and right here in Houston. And then let's make some serious efforts to move our capital from the people we say are enemies banks into these black banks. Because we do have them, hundreds of them, all across America. And we pretend they don't exist. Because if we accept that they exist, we have the responsibility to support them. And sometimes we feel comfortable thinking white things is the right things. And we don't move our money into the black banks. Because one of the greatest travesties that ever happened to us was something called Brown versus the Board, and I know y'all get confused if I say something like that. Because you don't understand history. Before the Brown versus the Board case was even dreamt of, there was 2 other cases that was in the road moving towards the Supreme Court. The Camden, South Carolina case that was asking for the proportional return of the black tax dollars so they can get their money and buy the things they needed for their children in school. And Brown versus the Board in Washington, D.C., not Topeka, Kansas. But somebody created a 3rd case, the one in Topeka, which was created back by white folks who used the daughter of the then NAACP president of Topeka to create another case and then join them with those 2 cases, but then overrode the meaning of the first 2 cases. Because the first 2 cases was not asking for integration. They're asking for the tax money and the proportion that it was taken from us be returned to our community for education. Now, it was much more complicated than that, but I hope that's enough to make you go and do the research on it. And there's a good book that'll help you out. So, how many people have seen this book? It's called Plural but Equal. You've never seen this book? One person. How many persons ever heard of an extraordinary black professor, writer, Dr. Harold Cruz? He wrote another book called The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, which should also be a must-read. But in this one, he does an analysis of the civil rights movement. Who profited and who gained. And I think this will be an enormously important book, because in trying to restore consciousness, you gotta understand history and purpose. There's so much stuff that goes on that we can't connect the dots with because we don't know history. Remember Tulsa, Oklahoma? Black Wall Street, right? And we all cried, oh, they burned Black Wall Street down, and they did this stuff in Black Wall Street, and most of you never read nothing more than a little caption on the YouTube video. The people from Black Wall Street came to Oklahoma from the Seminole Nation in Florida, who came to Florida from the slave plantations in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, who came from the slave plantation, from the slave ship from West Africa. You gotta put it all together if you want it to make sense. But there was an organization started in 1912 in New York City called the African Blood Brotherhood. And that organization got manipulated by the Marxist Leninists. But that organization had a chapter out in Oklahoma. And so the fighting you saw there, it was led by that organization. They actually defeated the Ku Klux Klan and defeated the white militias on the ground. That's why they went in there and dropped the bombs, because they had beaten them on the ground. They had won. But it wasn't just a white racist reaction. You have to know that the National Ku Klux Klan annual convention was in Tulsa 2 weeks before. That's how they gathered their troops to make the move on Tulsa, to take the land and to take the wealth that they had. We would have done better had we seen our liberal white friends and the Marxist CPUSA, which would become the Communist Party USA, and the Socialist Workers Party had already taken over the Blood Brotherhood and created a rift between the Blood Brotherhood and the Honorable Messiah Marcus Garvey and the UNIA. See, if you know history and you can put the dots together, you'll see how people were messing with your movement from the beginning. You understand what I'm saying? If you just see little pieces of it, you don't get it. And if you see Marcus Garvey, and you read Dr. Tony Martin, God bless his soul, where Tony writes that the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey said, I came to America to implement the Tuskegee model of Booker T. Ferry of Washington. Yet when we discussed Garvey, we never even had the word Booker Washington mentioned, because our Marxist left liberal friends have controlled the revolutionary historical narratives that you listen to when you make political decisions about what you're going to do next.
Teach about.
So we take a man like Booker T. Washington and throw him to the trash can, separated from Brother Garvey, who was his best friend. And it was Booker who invited him to bring his program to America. Garvey wanted to come and teach at Tuskegee. Booker said, no, that ain't gonna work in the South. You gotta go up in the Northeast. But Booker died mysteriously 5 months or so before Garvey got here. How many persons know where Booker Washington died? Show you how little you know about your leadership. You can keep only one? Okay. Isn't that amazing? One of the greatest black men in the history of Black America, we don't know where he died. He died in a train station in Baltimore on his way back to Tuskegee after having been poisoned by some people who brought him to New York for a meeting to solve a rift between him and Monroe Trotter over the issues of ideology and methodology. And some of our white left friends presided over that meeting where he got sick, went to St. Louis Hospital and never recovered, sent a telegram home asking his wife and aide to come and get him. If he died, he wanted to die in his beloved Tuskegee. He didn't make it back to Tuskegee. Isn't that a shame? He left us a whole university and we barely know his name. Because somebody tricked us to only look at the money that white people gave to help the university, not look at the man that outwit those white people who gave us money. And they didn't tell you the story how when W.B. Du Bois and C.L.R. James was working to put on what became the big Pan-African Conference, that Booker T. Ferry Washington got on a ship with Dr. Du Bois and sailed from New York to England and helped plan that conference, helped to finance that conference, and use his formidable propaganda machine to support that conference. But because he didn't attend the conference, when it actually happened, people not knowing these other things about him then minimize him and actually ostracize him. See, that read, I think it's Dr. Cain Wright, Booker T. Washington, the Pan-Africanist. So even before there was the first Pan-African Conference, Booker had already held a conference at the Tuskegee University called the Conference of the Negro World. And people came there from Jamaica, from Nevis, from other places in the Caribbean. Garvey couldn't make it because the British blocked him at that point. But he did send about 5 other persons who came. People came from Ghana, Liberia, Sierra Leone, South Africa, and Nigeria. But we don't call it a Pan-African Conference because Booker T. Washington did it, and they want to minimize Booker T. Washington in your mind as being a Pan-Africanist. Booker T. and Garvey was friends. Booker T. and Garvey, he invited Mr. Garvey to come over and work with him. And nobody even tell you that such a relationship exists, even though hundreds of letters is in the Schomburg Library that was exchanged between the two men. That's why you gotta study your history to erase the whiteness. And you know what's up. And you can connect the dot from New York to Oklahoma, from Oklahoma to Florida, from Oklahoma to Mexico, from Florida, back to Georgia to South Carolina to North Carolina, up to Wilmington, and further. And I'm gonna say a little more, and I'm gonna shut up. It's like the word Seminole. If you're from the Caribbean, we know the word maroon, right? And we understand maroon means those Africans that ran away and took their freedom and maintained that freedom. Well, the Spanish word for maroon was cimarron. Listen well, I want your ears to hear. Maroon is the anglicized version of cimarron, which is the word for runaway. Well, that cimarron is what the cracker couldn't pronounce when he called, you don't know where I'm going right now, when he goes to Florida, and what does he say? Seminole. But see, Spanish was controlling Florida then, so the word for runaways was what? Cimarron, the Maroons in the Spanish colony of Florida. But they don't want you to see the connection, because if you see the connection, you see the connections of the Africans who went to the Bahamas, the Africans who went to the Bermuda from Florida, the Africans who went to Haiti, and the African Americans who fought in the Haitian Revolution from Florida, and they don't want you to see that connection. They don't want you to listen and see that when Nat Turner was on trial and they asked Nat Turner who was his leader, what did Nat Turner say? Jean-Jacques Dessalines. And Dessalines was already dead. So the judge then said to these people, y'all go find this Negro Dessalines, bring him up in here, right? They come back and said that was the Haitian leader who was murdered. Yes. So they called Nat Turner back before the court. So this is the court record. Ask him, who is your leader? And he said, Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Because Jean-Jacques Dessalines was more than a person, it was an idea of freedom. Yes. It was an idea of the African mind being liberated. And it triggered multiple rebellions across North America. But you gotta put the dots together and see your history is not as disconnected as people want you to think. Go to Trinidad, meet Dr. Tony Martin. The last book Tony wrote, The History of the Caribbean. Fantastic. Read Eric Williams, from Columbus to Castro, and get a history, because you can't sit in North America and not understand your Caribbean brothers and sisters, because half of us already been married for the last 100 years into one another's family. There's hardly any separation between those two communities. My wife born in Aruba, her mama from Trinidad and dad from St. Martin. I'm locked in. One of my sons is married to a sister from Jamaica, the other one is married to a sister from the Dominican Republic. We're locked in. So study the history. It'll tell you a story about a people that have never really been separated. Right. The first black population to come to South Carolina came from Barbados. You can go to Trinidad and there's a whole section in the hills of Trinidad of those black people who fought with the British in the American Revolution. The ones who were in the north, they took those to Nova Scotia, but the one in the south, they took to Jamaica and Trinidad. And they left a whole community there. So if you study your history, you'll see an interconnectedness that won't let people drive the stakes of division between us out of ignorance. We've been united. But if you don't know the history, you think you're strangers. So that's all. I'll take any question. I just want to throw that kind of out there so y'all can see why history is so important, why reading these books is so important, why reading an author like Harold Cruse is important. And most of us, this is one of the greatest scholars we've ever had, but because the European intellectual community didn't appreciate his views, you never heard of Dr. Harold Cruse. He taught at Columbia University right beside Charles Hamilton. And I studied under both of them. But now that you've heard of Dr. Harold Cruse, get the book. It will blow your mind.